Welcome to Dental Business RX. Practice success in 30 minutes or less.
Thank you for calling ABC Dental.
This is probably going to be the longest episode I've ever recorded. And it's only part one of a three-part series on the subject of hiring and the interview process. Now, I do look at listen reports, where you take a look at, the average length of time a listener listens to an episode. So I suspect after that first line, I'm going to probably see some drop off after 5 minutes. But, whatever. We got to do what we got to do, right? But anyway, as we have a lot to cover, I'm going to skip the intro that I'd normally do, if that's okay, and just hop right into the topic. My name is Jeff Bloomberg, and I'm your host. And like I mentioned a second ago, this episode and the next two will be on the subject of hiring staff. I'll be covering the interview process, what to look for, some red flags to be aware of, and how to do your best to zero in on a good candidate for the position you're looking to fill. Now, we do a lot of training on this on the MGE Power Program, and I'll put a link to the Power Program on the episode webpage. So, we spent hours and hours and hours on this. So as I was putting this podcast together, I thought, I could go over some of the basic stuff and throw it out there, which would help people. But instead, I decided to go big or go home on this. That's why this is a long episode, and the next two maybe won't be as long, but there's definitely going to be a lot of information, and data, a lot of meat to it, so that you can actually take this data and start using it in your office to improve your hiring process. And of course, this comes with a disclaimer. I am not an employment attorney, and employment law varies wildly, state to state in the United States. And of course, there's even more variance if you're listening outside the U.S. So the lesson is to have a good employment attorney you can talk to. Nothing I say will constitute legal advice, and we, of course, expect that you rely on the appropriate advisor to ensure you stay within the letter of the law within your municipality. All right, then. So let's start with some basics. When you're hiring, what's the most important attribute you're looking for? How would you look back, in other words, and say, that was a good hire? Well, you could boil it all down, at least in my opinion, to one word: performance. Did the person carry out the tasks, get the expected right result? Did they perform at a high level or, work up to a high level? That's really the most important thing. And you think about it, it doesn't just apply to hiring staff. And I don't want to compare hiring staff to buying a car or using an instrument of some kind. But if you have a car and it's a daily driver and it doesn't break down and it's a decent ride and it gets you from point A to point B and you paid a fair amount for it, then that performed well. If it broke down every day, cost too much, was a gas guzzler and you didn't want to pay for it, well, then that wouldn't be performing. If you buy a knife, what do you expect to do? You expect it to cut things. So you go to cut a tomato, and if the knife's blunt, messes the tomato up and squishes it, you have to grab another knife because that knife's missing. Or when you go to cut the tomato, the knife whines at you that it doesn't like cutting tomatoes, then it's not performing. So with personnel, you are looking for performance. Can the person do consistently what you're hiring them to do? And can they do it at a high level or work their way up to it? And to me, that's how I judge personnel. If I have two personnel or two team members, and one's a performer and one's not, let's say I do, and both are late for work. Well, I'm going to probably be a bit more severe from a judgment perspective with the person who's not performing. Because the person, and I'm not saying that the person who's performing should be allowed to be late. I would obviously talk to them. But if someone's performing, they're doing their part for the organization or the team. And one of the first questions I normally get when I go over this with a client, performance is important. Well, the first questions I get afterwards is, well, what if you have somebody who performs, but they don't get along with the rest of the staff or they upset the rest of the staff? Now, when I've seen this, usually one of two things is happening in most cases. Number one, you have this person, let's say it's your financial coordinator, and they're real prickly with the receptionist and the scheduler. They don't get along with them. But, the receptionist and the scheduler are best buddies, and they like to maintain harmony, etc. When you start to dig in a bit, you find that the receptionist and the scheduler really aren't doing their jobs very much, and the financial coordinator is having to pick up all the slack, and as a result, the financial coordinator is pissed off all the time. But the financial coordinator is a performer. This is why you want to have statistics, by the way, because then you'd see Financial coordinator's a performer. The scheduler is not. I have openings all the time, and my receptionist is goofing off half the time. If you had statistics, you could measure this. But then, of course, the financial coordinator is going to be upset because they're doing other people's jobs while they get paid for it. So in that case, the problem isn't with your financial coordinator. Of course, you'd hope they'd have a better way of handling it rather than getting upset or rude or whatever. But it's at least understood to a degree. So that's scenario one. Scenario two, when I see this, performer who doesn't get along with the rest of the staff, is they're not really a performer. On the outside, they look like a performer, but then when you start to dig a bit, you find out that, they're not really performing all that well. A treatment coordinator who the OM's really closing all the cases, or I've seen it where, someone has a hygienist and, they're the best hygienist, they're super productive, but then when you dig in a bit, you find out that they're charging for procedures they're not doing, or, everybody's getting 12 Arrestin treatments or something when they don't need them. Yeah, I've seen that before. So the point being is usually a performer will get along with the rest of the team, assuming the rest of the team is also performing. And this is something to know when you hire somebody. They actually have two basic hats. One of their hats is the job you're hiring them for, hygienist, assistant, front desk, or, reception, etc. The other hat they have is they have a staff member hat for your practice. How do they represent the practice, which would include outside the practice, as well as inside. How do you treat your fellow staff members? What are your basic responsibilities as a staff member? So it's important that people are aware of both of those hats. And usually the average person is a decent person. If they know this, they want to do a good job, they'll try to do a good job as a staff member and as their position. But of course, nobody's perfect. So essentially, we are looking for performers. So now the question is, how do you know if somebody's a performer? Well, unfortunately, you have to work with them. I'm not saying that's, in a sense, unfortunate, but if the idea is you're hiring, you don't want to have to work with everybody to determine if they're a performer or not. You'd like to have some degree of screening so you can grab somebody who potentially could perform. But again, you're never going to know 100% till you work with them. So the real question is, with the hiring process, is how do we zero in on what are probably going to be the best performers? Again, keeping in mind, you have to work with them, and even then you might be wrong, and eliminate the ones least likely to perform. And that's what the hiring process is all about. So where that starts, before you even get into the interview, where that starts is when you start getting applications. One of the things you'll see with somebody who has a high potential to perform is they tend to move quickly. They tend to get things confronted and handled very rapidly. So this is usually where I see things go wrong during the hiring process. You need to fill a position and you place an ad. Then you start getting responses to your ad, regardless of where you're placing it. And you're real busy. And of course, you're even busier because you're shorthanded. So then these responses that you get just languish for a week until you have time to call them back. The problem with that is the performer types will have already been to probably 3 interviews at that point. These people want to get a job and they want to get it now. So if you want to find good performing team members, the first thing I would tell you is when you place an ad, be ready to field the responses to that ad, whether it's phone calls or emails or how are you going to respond to these folks immediately, like that day. If I get ads, I place an ad and I start getting responses at 1 o'clock, I'm going to try and call these folks 3:30 so they make sure or email them so they know that I'm interested. I want to be one of the people in the mix. And I'm doing this with everybody. So some of these folks are going to be performers, some are not. But the point being is I want to have myself out there so that I have the best crack at the best potential personnel. So that's the first thing. Okay, so then let's get into the hiring process. Let's assume you have an applicant. What are our primary criteria, at least that I use, and this is what we teach our clients, when making a decision to hire? And there are other criteria. I want to be clear, and I'm going to be going through a lot of those criteria with you. There's criterions. I have to look that up. I don't use that word a lot. What are the criteria? Actually, I think that's plural. Yes, good. What are the criteria? This is going to become the podcast about grammar now. What are the criteria of making a decision to hire? Well, there's 4 things. The first thing, the applicant's emotional tone level, where they are on the emotional tone scale, which is I'm going to explain that in this episode. Point number 2 is their ability to produce, as shown by prior jobs. Like I want to see if they had performed in prior positions, because that's at least a track record of performance. Number 3, I want to make sure they're qualified for the position. If it's a position that requires licensing, they're licensed. They want it. There's no major red flags, etc. And we're going to get into some of those. And number 4, there are no major barriers to doing the position. The position is Monday through Friday and they can't work Mondays. Well, that's a problem. Or the position requires some travel. Well, they can't travel. That's a problem. These are the things, these 4 points, tone level, production, qualified for the position, no major barriers, that are the big picture items I'm looking for when hiring somebody. Of course, there are other criteria I'm going to go through, but those are the 4 big ones. And when I'm hiring, it's not this big emotional process for me. I keep it very logical and simple. I don't get into opinions. Oh, that person is immature, they're not mature enough, or that person is blah, or I don't like the school they went to. None of that has anything to do with me. I keep it just very, very, just the facts. And sure, there are many other things I look at, which again, I'm going to explain, but those are the 4 basic things. And when I used to interview, and I don't really do it anymore. I did most of the hiring for MGE back from about through 98 to 2006 or 7. Then I hired a personnel director, and I slowly backed off to where now I usually meet somebody if they're going to be a potential executive to see if that I'd be able to work with them. But I don't make it a huge production. I'm very matter of fact. I don't ask weird questions. How many ping pong balls could you fit in a school bus? I don't want to know their strengths or weaknesses, which I'll explain why in a little bit. But most importantly, I don't worry about screwing up and hiring the wrong person. I'm not fixated on, oh my gosh, I can't hire the wrong person. I have to hire the right person. I want a workable candidate that looks like they could do the job. So why do I think that way? Well, there's 2 reasons. Even though what we do and what we teach our clients eliminates 80+% of the chance in making a bad hire, there's still that 20% or less chance it's not going to work out. And I have to be ready to move on sooner the better. And number 2, the biggest problem, and I found this is something I found with our clients all the time, is not hiring the wrong person. That is not the big problem. The problem is keeping the wrong person. And I don't have a huge button on, if I hire somebody and a week later it looks like it's just not going to work, I will let them go. I don't have a huge button on that. And I'm a firm believer because I'll give you 2 examples. I'm a firm believer in that if I hire somebody and it's apparent really early on, because that's when I'm going to know whether this is going to potentially work or not, I'm going to tell them what they're messing up because I always believe people have the ability to improve or change. And I've had that happen before. I have somebody in the first week, it just doesn't look good, and I'll tell them, hey, we're having trouble with this. I don't know if this is going to work for you. And then they turn it around and turn into a great employee. And conversely, I've done the same thing and said, hey, I don't think this is going to work out, and it doesn't. Or they tell me, yeah, I was thinking it wasn't going to work out either. We can just part ways. The point being is if it's not going to work, I'd rather tell a person earlier rather than let them sit there for a while I look for their replacement. And you may think this is weird or unconventional, but if I have a receptionist and it's not working out, and I say this because the current receptionist we have is amazing. She's been with us like 15 years. So bad example. But the point being is, let's say you have an employee and it's not working out. I would tell them as it's happening because then it gives them a chance to improve. Or they don't want to improve and they just move on. And if it wasn't working out and I had to let them go, I would let them go immediately and leave the position empty rather than waiting till I found somebody else to fill it. It's a bit of an unconventional viewpoint. Let's say you have a schedule coordinator. It's not working. You're pretty sure you're going to fire this person. So you start looking for their replacement. Meanwhile, you have a bad schedule coordinator who's damaging your schedule. You're better off having nobody there, people scheduling from the side, your office manager, your dental assistant, your financial coordinator, till you can find a schedule coordinator. That has always been my experience. You may think that's weird or unconventional. I think it's a lot kinder to the person that I'm letting go. I've seen it where people keep a person with the intention of replacing them, not tell them anything, look for their replacement, and then have them train their replacement. I think that is horribly mean because when a person takes a job, they start to orient their life around their job, where their kids are going to go to school, the supermarket they go to, where they live. So why would I want someone to get comfortable if I'm planning on letting them go? But again, if I'm planning on letting them go, I'm going to let them know so that they can change unless it's something that's super egregious, in which case I'm just going to move on. So yeah, you'll see me hire somebody, but and be excited about it. But before I work with this person, I'm not going to throw all my eggs in that basket until I can actually see what they can do. The other thing you want to do, is keep in mind the mindset that your hiring is something that you're going to be doing continuously. I think this is where people go a bit wrong in that, you probably market your business. Well, marketing is something that you're going to do, till you're done with your business. That's just something you do, right? Well, hiring is the same way. People get into this frame of mind, well, I hired these people and they're here, so I don't have to hire for a while. And then you unexpectedly lose somebody, then you have to turn on the hiring machinery again and has to, sputter back to life, and it takes a while to replace that person. I'm of the mind that I'm always on the hunt for good talent. I'm always looking for good talent. Why? Because some people aren't going to work out and I'm going to have to replace them because they can't perform for whatever reason. Or you'll have performers that leave for whatever reason. Life circumstances change. They have to move. Their friend offered them a partnership in a business and it's an opportunity they can't pass up and they're sad to go. Things happen. So you have to keep that mindset that you're always on the lookout for good talent because people aren't machines. You're not just changing a gear in a machine. This is a person and they have a life. All right. So let's dig into this a bit. I mentioned these 4 things, the first being the emotional tone scale or someone's emotional tone level. Well, what is the emotional tone scale? Well, if you're familiar with MGE, you know that we use the Hubbard Management System developed by L. Ron Hubbard. The Hubbard Management System consists of millions of words covering just about every aspect of management and communication you could possibly conceive of, from finance to efficiency to organization to sales to marketing, etc. Well, one of the tools from the Hubbard Management System that Mr. Hubbard spent years researching, it was the emotional tone scale. So what does the emotional tone scale do? It predicts human behavior. If you know where someone resides on the emotional tone scale, you can determine how trustworthy they are, how honest they'll be, what their ethics level will be, their ability to handle responsibility, your value as a friend. This has a lot of applicability, obviously, even beyond hiring, has a lot of applicability in sales, but also just interpersonal relations, relating to other people. There is a ton of data on the emotional tone scale. We spent a lot of time on it early on in the MGE program. I cover it at Seminar B, MGE Communication and Sales Seminar B. I put a link to it on the episode webpage. We also do 2 courses on the emotional tone scale on DDS Success. One is a full primer on it. It takes about 3-4 hours, like what is the tone scale, how does it work, etc. And then there's another, which is how to use the tone scale as a communication tool. I'll put a link to that on the episode webpage as well. So this is something that I could go off talking about, like the DDS Success content is, 5 or 6 hours. My section of Seminar B where I go over the tone scale is like 5 or 6 hours. And then there's more as a person continues to train. So there's a lot of data about this. So obviously I'm not going to do a 5 or 6 hour podcast, but I am going to get into some basics on this. So what is it and how does it work? So I'm going to have Mr. Hubbard explain it to you. I'm going to read you an introduction from an article where he introduces the tone scale. And if you want to follow along, which I definitely recommend that you do, I have a copy of the tone scale that you can download for free as a link on the episode webpage. So here's what Mr. Hubbard says. The tone scale, a vital tool for any aspect of life involving one's fellows, is a scale which shows the successive emotional tones a person can experience. By tone is meant the momentary or continuing emotional state of a person. Emotions such as fear, anger, grief, enthusiasm, and others which people experience are shown on this graduated scale. Skillful use of this scale enables one to both predict and understand human behavior in all its manifestations. Now I'm going to interject here for a second. Think about that last line. Skillful use of the scale enables one to both predict and understand human behavior in all its manifestations. So when we say predict human behavior, what does that mean? That means I can predict. I have a pretty good idea. I can determine what Joe is going to do if I ask Joe to do this. So that's pretty, useful. When you think about it, it does give you a little bit of an edge, doesn't it? All right, he ends off with this. This tone scale plots the descending spiral of life from full vitality and consciousness through half vitality and half consciousness down to death. These various levels are common to all people. All right, so if you have this scale in front of you, and you're not driving, maybe you could look at the scale before you get in the car. Have a look at it. So if you look, what's at the bottom of the scale? We have death. That's actual death. So we're not going to talk about that. That's at 0. What's right above death? Apathy. Then above apathy is grief. Above grief is fear. Above fear is covert hostility. Above covert hostility is anger. Then above that you have antagonism. Above that you have boredom. Then you have contented. Then you have conservative, cheerful, and enthusiasm. So if you look, these all have numbers next to them because they'll sometimes refer to these tones by number. Death is 0. Apathy is 0.05. It's pretty close to death, right? Enthusiasm is 4. And these numbers are helpful in the sense that they're arbitrary numbers, but they help you relate to the other points on the scale. So if you go death is at 0 and apathy is at 0.05, that's pretty close, you see. Enthusiasm's at 4. Conservatism is at 3. You can relate the tones to one another by having the numbers there. It's an arbitrary set of numbers, but they're useful in the sense of how to relate the different tones to the different tones. All right, so we're going to get into each of these tones a little bit, as well as a few key points about the scale itself. So the first thing to know, I'm going to let Mr. Hubbard explain again. It says this: the position of an individual on this tone scale varies through the day and throughout the years, but it's fairly stable for given periods. One's position on the chart will rise on the receipt of good news, sink with bad news. This is the usual give and take of life. All right, so let's say you're at cheerfulness on the tone scale and you're having a nice day. You wake up in the morning, you have your coffee, you get in the car, and you're sitting in traffic, okay, for, 3 hours. And then, you're about to get off the off-ramp for the highway and you notice you have a flat tire. So now you're out changing your flat tire and then it starts to rain. Then by the time you get to work, you're pretty pissed off. Now you're at anger on the tone scale. Someone asks how your day is and you yell at them. Right? So you had some bad experience, so therefore your tone level went down. All right? Or let's say, you're a conservative person and you close a big case and the patient's really happy about it. You feel uptone, you feel cheerful. So you see how people can go up and down, right? If you remember this when we still had toy stores and it wasn't just Amazon, there's always, you probably, if you have children, you've experienced this or you've seen it. You're in the toy store and some kid wants a toy, right? Maybe they've already bought a doll and they want another doll. So they're really excited. Hey, Mom, could I have another doll? Because kids generally tend to be very uptone, if you take a look. As a matter of fact, if you look in society and you were to pick the subset of people that are the highest tone, you'd probably say kids. I asked a seminar that once and somebody said celebrities and politicians. And I said, I have no idea what planet they're from. But it's usually kids, right? So you look at kids, they're very uptone. Hey, my name is Johnny. What's your name? They're very, looking around. They're very out there. They're reaching, etc. But, so you got this kid and they're in Toys R Us and they want another doll. Mom says, well, we already got you one. So now they start to descend down the tone scale. Well, what if I do this? Could I have that doll? No, you can't have it. You already have one. You're going to have to put the other one back, right? Now the kid gets a bit antagonistic, right? You better get me that doll. Maybe they descend to anger. I want it now. Mom's like, don't talk to me that way. So what do they start doing? They cry. Or no, actually what they'll probably do before they start crying, they try to slide it into the cart themselves. They drop into fear or covert hostility. They're going to slide the doll in while Mom's not looking. Mom puts it back, tells them don't do it again. They cry. So the kid's crying because they can't get the doll. You never get me anything I want. And Mom gets the doll because they don't want to be have their kid taken away by child services at that point, right? Anyway, you get the idea. So someone goes up and down the tone scale based upon, as Mr. Hubbard says, on the receipt of good news, or will rise on the receipt of good news, sink with bad news. You could also apply that to circumstances a person's dealing with in life. But you'll notice he also said, but it's fairly stable for given periods. Well, there's more to this. He adds this. Everyone, however, has a chronic position on the chart. Everyone, however, has a chronic position on the chart. So what does chronic mean? Persisting or continually recurring. In this case, persisting. So the tone scale has this chronic aspect, where somebody tends to live tone level-wise. And he elaborates a bit further in this next quote. So you can kind of think with this basic point here. This scale, meaning the tone scale, has a chronic or an acute aspect. A person can be brought down the tone scale to a low level for 10 minutes and then go back up, or he can be brought down it for 10 years and not go back up. A person who has suffered too many losses, too much pain, tends to become fixed at some lower level of the scale and with only slight fluctuations, stay there. Then their general and common behavior will be at that level of the tone scale. So let's take a look at that again. A person who suffered too many losses, too much pain, tends to become fixed at some lower level of the scale. So let's say somebody's had lost their job, lost their career, their marriage split up, etc. They're just crashed down the tone scale, right? So I'll continue what he says here. Some lower level of the scale, and with only slight fluctuations, stay there. Then their general and common behavior will be at that level of the tone scale. So this person, let's say, is stuck in grief. That's how they're going to approach life at that point. They're stuck in grief. He continues. Just as a 0.5 moment of grief, 0.5 being the point of the tone scale, just as a 0.5 moment of grief can cause a child to act along the grief band for a short while, so can a 0.5 fixation cause an individual to act 0.5, meaning grief, toward most things in their life. There is momentary behavior or fixed behavior. All right, so we have this up and down, and then we have where the person tends to live. So you could have somebody who's chronically, let's say, conservative, and good thing happens, they pop up the tone scale. They're cheerful about it. Then they find out that their pet passed away and they're in grief, which is to be expected and normal. Or they find out that, someone overcharged them for something. Now they're angry momentarily. But where they tend to live most of the time is in conservatism. That's generally their approach to life. It's conservative, okay? You could see this with any other tone. So if you see where we are so far, we've got person goes up and down. That's the acute aspect of the tone scale. And then there's a chronic aspect to this tone scale. Now, last couple things to know about this, and then we're going to start getting into the individual tones. He says this, there's a thing called volume on this tone scale. Terror is more fear. Where's rage? It's just more anger. Where is sorrow? It's just less grief. So you've probably met somebody before who looked like if you said the wrong thing, they were going to just blow up. They just look like you feel like you're walking on eggshells around this person. So maybe this person is in chronic anger on the tone scale, but their volume is only a 2 right now. Then you do something that upsets them, then boom, now that volume's at 8. Okay? Or you have a patient who's in grief and they come in and they look like, again, you say the wrong thing, they're just going to cry. And then they start crying when the hygienist is giving them oral hygiene instructions. The volume went up, okay? So we have the volume aspect of the scale, we have the chronic aspect of the scale, and we have the acute aspect of the scale, the up and down. Okay, so I want to get into these tones individually so you're somewhat familiar with them. Then we're going to look at how we apply this to hiring. Okay, so we're going to get into these tones, and then we're going to look at how they apply with hiring. We're also going to look at what you can do to start determining what a person's chronic tone might be during the hiring process. Because, look, it's not a news flash. This isn't the big reveal. You probably want to hire somebody who's a little higher on the tone scale. Like, imagine for a second, because again, people can put on a face when they come in for an interview, right? This is what people complain about, Oh, I interviewed this person. They seemed like the perfect applicant, and then they showed up for their job, and it was almost like I had another person in their body. It's like a personality transplant. So they put their best foot forward during the interview. What you were seeing was this social acute tone. You weren't seeing the person's actual tone level. So, you end up with a receptionist you thought was higher tone, but they're really antagonistic. Well, antagonism or anger doesn't work really good for a receptionist. Let's be real. I don't want to feel like I'm being blown off or that someone's annoyed that I called your practice. Okay? Same thing applies with any position, So we're going to get into these tones a little bit, then we're going to get into how do you spot it? Like, what do you do? And again, I don't know what else to say about it. We do seminars on this. We do courses on this. Again, I have those links on the episode webpage. If you really want to learn this in depth, there's only so much I can do, A, via an audio platform, and B, in just the time that I have, even though this is going to be the longest episode ever. So let's start with the scale. I'm going to start at the bottom. We're not going to talk about death. That's pretty obvious. Let's start with apathy. So what is apathy? Well, I'll have Mr. Hubbard frame it for you here. He says, here is the person who has lost so much in life that he cannot rise to any situation, but simply gives up about everything. So if you take a look at apathy, the person is completely beaten down. And I want you to imagine you have a problem. So any kind of a problem. You can't pay your rent, you just lost an employee, collections are down, new patients are down. Just think of any kind of problem you might run into, or your schedule is 2 hours behind. So when you have a problem, you're generally looking at ways, okay, how do I solve this problem? What do I do? Okay, I do this, I do this. In apathy, a person is so convinced there's absolutely zero they can do to solve that problem. There's nothing that it's, what problem? Why even bother? They're just in apathy about it, okay? If you wanted to get the feeling of apathy, and let's say you're an employee, in a dental practice, I want you to imagine that your office is collecting about $100,000 a month. And then the doc comes back from a seminar, not one of ours, and says, okay, folks, we have to collect $1 million next month or I'm firing everyone. Now, look, I'm a big fan of expansion. I've just never seen an office scale from $100,000 to $1 million in a month. It just doesn't happen. So what would happen? You really put yourself in this position. You think there's no way we're going to do $1 million. You might be enthusiastic in the sense you'd like to try, but you know that that's just not going to happen. So you think, okay, I'm getting fired. You might verify, am I really getting fired, doctor? Yes, you are. Well, then you're going to start looking for another job. You've just given up. So that would be more of an acute apathy. But that's apathy. You rarely see patience in this tone. And usually when you do, either A, they're in pain, or B, someone else brings them in. Here's my brother. The person plops in the chair, and you talk to him about replacing the missing teeth that they have. Oh, why would I do that? I'm going to die anyway. My grandpa had dentures at 34. My dad had them at 38. I may just pull all my teeth. It doesn't matter. Apathy. You may have seen friends who've gone into apathy on relationships, for example. Again, this going up and down the tone scale, but it might happen over time with losses in life. You have this person they're real excited about getting married, so they're enthusiastic about it, and then the relationship doesn't work out. So you find out a lot of bad things about the person. So they think, okay, next time I'm going to be a bit more cautious in my approach. So they really sort of vet their future partners. They really make sure they're picking the right person, and they do, and it doesn't work out. So now they're upset. They're really irritated and annoyed. I'm getting older. I need to get married. They've dropped down the tone scale into antagonism, right? And their next relationship doesn't work out. Now they're afraid they're never going to find anybody. And then that relationship doesn't work out. And then they've just decided there's just no hope for me. Why would I ever bother doing this? I've seen people do this in business. You can see it anywhere, okay? But apathy has a very unique look to it. And, let me give you an illustration. And this really, it's not something you're necessarily going to see, but I'll give you an illustration. I've been on site in close to 1,000 dental practices over the United States in my career. I started doing this in the early 90s during the first Clinton administration when I was 10 years old. I'm kidding. I was older than that. So I get called into this one office, for an on-site visit. And it's by the doc's office manager, who's his mom. And I'm not hating on that. I think that's fine, right? That isn't the point. But I get called in. So I go to the office, and it's in a nice strip mall. But I walk in the office. First thing I notice is the office is filthy, which dirt and healthcare don't match. And it really doesn't matter how well you're doing financially. Bleach and cleaning supplies don't cost very much money. Then I go to sit in one of the chairs in the reception area, and it's wobbly. It almost falls over. I'm like, okay, a little shim. You could bust off a piece of wood, tape a shim to this thing, and the chair wouldn't wobble. So it's just these really weird things. So then I'm going to meet the doc. So I'm going to walk in down the hallway, and he's got the ops on either side of the hallway. So I go to the front of the hallway, and he's walking to the hallway towards me. And I want to describe this picture to you. And I'm not doing this to be judgmental or mean, but I want you to just put yourself in my position for a second. So he's walking down the hallway towards me, and if you've ever seen, if you've been around for a while, you've seen this. If not, you might have seen it on like a Brady Bunch episode or something. There used to be these smocks dentists wore in the 70s, okay? They were like polyester, they'd be white or colored or whatever, and they had a zipper that went up about half the shirt with this big collar, okay? It's almost like a dental zipper Henley, okay? Well, he's got one of those on, which, okay, fine, it's outdated, but it's like 11 sizes too small. It goes down to his belly button, and there's no shirt underneath. So the rest of his belly is showing. He's wearing essentially a half shirt. And he's been working on patients, okay? And his belly is sticking out the bottom. Again, I'm not saying that to be judgmental, but, there's a certain vibe you want to give off in healthcare, and that's definitely not the vibe. Like, imagine you're a patient because he didn't have an assistant. He's reaching over you to grab something. It's just uncomfortable, okay? So we sit down in his office, and usually what I like to ask, because I'm normally not called in when things are going well, is why do you think things are going the way that they are going? Because I want to get into the person's mind a bit, find out what's their mindset towards all of this. And I kid you not, I've told this story in seminars before. This is exactly what happened. And you can't see this because this is audio. He put his head in his hand and sort of shook it very slowly and said, I'm asking why his statistics are so terrible. And he says, fluoride ruined dentistry. That was his answer. This is 1993 or 4 when this happened. So in his opinion, because I clarified, because there was fluoride in toothpaste and fluoride in mouthwash and fluoride in water supplies, dentistry was no longer a fruitful profession. Like, there was no money in dentistry anymore. That was his viewpoint, why dentistry was no longer any good and he could not be successful. Fluoride. So what is he going to do about fluoride? Absolutely nothing. He's not going to get it out of toothpaste, the water, the mouthwash, etc. So he was in complete apathy. And it showed in his appearance. He was just, for someone to dress that way, it shows a massive amount of unawareness, you see, of your surroundings and your environment. That's apathy, okay? Anyway, I'm not going to beat on this one too hard, but I want to at least get a picture of the tone level, because you might think somebody's in apathy when they're really not. But you've seen applicants who come in and they look like they haven't bathed in a week or they slept in their clothes, because, it's not cost of what they have. It's is it taken care of? You could be broke and still iron your shirt. I did when I was broke when I was younger. So that's the point. All right, then moving up to our next tone, we have the tone of grief. So what is grief? Mr. Hubbard says, grief takes place where one recognizes their loss and failure. So a person could be in grief about anything, and all of us have been in points of momentary grief. True? We've had losses in our life. Maybe you lost the job that you really loved, or your business went out of business, or you lost a loved one, or a relationship, or a pet, or it's loss, as Mr. Hubbard says, loss and failure. So most of us have experienced acute grief. Well, sometimes you end up with people who are stuck in chronic grief, okay? And, what's the difference? There's a lot of differences. And like I said, there's a ton of material on this, folks, and I'm never going to get into it in a podcast. It's just impossible. And like I said, I'll shameless plug again, do MGE Communications Sales Seminar B, should do A and C as well, or check out DDS Success and the 2 courses we have on the tone scale on there. But, let's say you have 2 people. One's in enthusiasm and one's in grief. That's just their chronic tone level. And they go home and find out that their dog died. Okay, so what's the enthusiastic person going to do? He's not going to say yippee because he's in enthusiasm. No, he's going to be in grief. He's very sad. But, time will pass and he'll be fine. He'll rebound from that grief pretty quick. Whereas the person in chronic grief, a year later still has an armband on that says Spot, and oh my gosh, Spot, they just never get over it. They just stay there. That's where they're stuck, okay? So that's grief. Now, what's our next tone? Above grief is fear. This is a tone that you at least see acutely in dentistry a lot. Someone who may be uptone, they're an uptone person, they're conservative, they're cheerful, etc. But they come into your practice and then boom, you see the fear. They're jittery, sweaty palms. Some people have medical conditions that make their palms sweat. That's not what I'm talking about. They normally don't have that, and the palms are sweating, their hands are nervous or shaky. They sit in a chair and they hear a noise and they freak out. They're in fear. They look ill at ease. And there's an interesting distinguishing characteristic of fear. I want to read this to you because there's, like I said, a lot to know about this. One of the clues into someone's tone is their eyes. So this is what Mr. Hubbard says about someone's eyes at the tone of fear. At fear itself, the very obvious characteristic is that the person can't look at you. People are too dangerous to look at. He's supposedly talking to you, but he's looking over in left field. Then he glances at your feet briefly, then over your head. You get the impression a plane is passing over, but now he's looking back over his shoulder. Flick, flick, flick. In short, he'll look anywhere but at you. You ever had that before? You're talking to somebody, and their eyes are everywhere, and you try to look at them for a second, and they won't look at you. That's fear, especially as he says the flick, flick, flick. It's not this slow boat where they look at the floor and then look at the ceiling and they look at you. A person in fear, as Mr. Hubbard says, can't look at you. People are too dangerous to look at. Now, a couple of the things you'll see with a patient in fear is they tend to be somewhat irrational. You'll explain to them what's going on with their, teeth or oral health. Maybe they need 4 crowns and 2 root canals. And they'll go, okay, I get it, doc, and I really appreciate you telling me all about that. But, I have to go on a cruise. And you wonder, did he or she just hear what I said? So you said again, well, it's really important that we get to these root canals and these crowns as soon as possible. Yeah, but this cruise is really important. Or you'll get a lot of excuses or weird objections. Or they may agree with you. Oh, okay, good. Can I come in tomorrow morning to do it? And you go, great. Well, can you prepay for the procedure? You can save 5%. Oh, no, I'm going to bring a check in the morning. And then, morning comes, they don't show up, and then you get a call that night or an email from their spouse saying, please transfer their records. Okay? Person in fear has a very difficult time with confronting and handling things. All right? All right, then we go above fear. This one's, I say this sarcastically, everybody's favorite tone level, covert hostility. This is a tricky tone level, folks, okay? Let's start with just, let's look at the word, because Mr. Hubbard is very literal, covert hostility. What does covert mean? Well, like covert ops, hidden, secret, concealed. That's covert, right? What's hostility? Ill will, unfriendly, desire to harm. So this person, we combine these two words, has a hidden, secret, or concealed hostility, ill will, unfriendliness, and desire to harm. It's secret. So if you're talking to somebody who's antagonistic or pissed off, right? That person is obviously hostile, and they're pissed off at you, let's say, an angry person. There's obvious hostility there. You're worried they're going to punch you, right? That's hostility. It's open hostility, right? Especially like an antagonism, for example. In covert hostility, it's hidden. So what's it hidden behind? In a lot of cases, a smile or concern. I'm really concerned about you, blah, 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 blah. When really they hate your guts. So that's why it's a very tricky tone level. I mean, look at the picture. I love the picture on the tone scale. If you've downloaded the tone scale, it's a person with their hand outstretched with a big smile with a knife behind their back. All right? So, like I said, this one is a tough one to detect. Okay? So, and you'll see why when Mr. Hubbard describes it. He says, here is the level of covert hostility, the most dangerous and wicked level on the tone scale. Here is the person who smiles while he inserts a knife blade in your vertebrae. Here's the person who tells you how he stood up for you when actually he has practically destroyed your reputation. Here is the insincere flatterer who yet awaits only a moment of unguardedness to destroy. Okay. So we've all run into folks like this. Someone you thought was your friend when they were really backstabbing you. And there's lots of words we have for people like this in society. A two-faced person or a backstabber, things like that. That's just tone. And this one's tough because you might meet somebody who's in covert hostility and they may smile at you and look at you when really their intentions are very nasty. And I've had that happen before. Someone will tell me, oh, this person's really uptone. They're very cheerful. And I meet them, and after talking to them, I'm like, no, they're covertly hostile. So it gives you the biggest head fake. And I want you to look at that scale again, if you relate it to fear for a second. So if you look at fear, so let's say there's someone that I'm having trouble with or I'm having difficulty with, and I'm in the tone level of fear. Now, that difficulty would iron out or come to a head if I talk to them. Well, if in fear, I'm not going to do that. So what am I going to do? I'm going to see them, and they're going to go, Jeff, how are you doing? And I'm going to say, oh, pretty good. How's the weather? I'm not willing to confront them at all because I'm in fear. But then if you go up the tone scale just a smidge to covert hostility, just 0.1, 1/10 of a point, I'm now in covert hostility. So I'm no longer being inactive about that person and doing nothing and avoiding them. I'm taking covert action. So I'm smiling at them. Hey, Joe, it's great to see you. Meanwhile, I'm talking, smack about Joe behind his back, trying to get him fired. That's covert hostility. So that's a rough one to deal with. There's very specific things you have to know in order to be able to detect these people. These are the guys. These are the when I've seen hires like this. These are the practice destroyers. Someone will go and this is they fire this person. The person eventually quits, and they find the insurance questions that came back that were never answered, requests for more information, or the statements that were tossed in the dumpster, or the bills that they were looking for that went unpaid that were stuffed in this person's drawer, or that's covert hostility. All right, so next tone up, anger. All right, so this one's pretty obvious, but let me read you this. This is what Mr. Hubbard says. He says, angry people do certain things. You expect an angry person to break things. You can expect them to be untruthful. You can expect them to try and dominate people around them by shouting at them, by ordering them in general, and by threatening to punish them by being abusive. You know the pattern of an angry person. So, again, pretty obvious. Now, what's interesting about this, during a personnel interview, I mean, it's pretty much a non-starter if someone comes in and they're pissed off at you. Like you're interviewing a prospective employee and they're like, I have a bone to pick with you. I'm really mad. Okay, that's really not going to go anywhere. So the person's got to be at least lower volume anger when they come in to see you, or the interview's not going to go anywhere, right? So maybe the volume's at 1 or 2, right? It's just right there, and they're trying to put a happy face over it. So again, this is where the volume plays into this again. The other thing that's interesting is when someone's angry, they say and do things without any thought or concept of consequences at all. And we do this, if you've ever had a fight with your spouse or with someone like a friend, you'll say some pretty yucky stuff. And what do we always say afterwards? Oh, I'm really sorry, I didn't mean it. Well, you don't mean it now, but you probably meant it then. Whatever, you get the point. And I want to differentiate between something, because I always get asked this when I'm lecturing on it. So you have anger and you have antagonism, right? We're going to get into antagonism here in a second. But I want you to imagine for a second, think of a time. Don't think of it long, especially if you're driving, but think of a time when you were just super, super mad. You were enraged. You were super pissed off. So think of that for a second. What did you want to do at that very moment? When I ask this question in a seminar, what are the responses I get? Smash, break, kill, blah, 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 right? Destroy. That's anger, okay? That's anger. So you have low volume, high volume, etc., but that's the tone. All right, next tone up, antagonism. So Mr. Hubbard describes antagonism as overt, meaning open or obvious, hostility, overt hostility. And he explains further. He says, the occasional grouch, he's talking about the antagonistic person, the occasional grouch, the complaining individual who yet makes no mistake about what he finds wrong, the quote-unquote blunt, honest type who tactlessly tears up the tenderer feelings of their companions. We've all met people like this. They're irritable. They're annoyed. They're, this is the patient who comes into your practice. Oh, I'm going to sit here because with the amount of money I've given you people, that's my chair. Or if you're running 10 minutes late, they're up with your receptionist going, hey, listen, I don't think you guys value my time because, I was here on time and you aren't seating me. And when is this going to happen? I'm starting to get really annoyed about this. They're very confrontational. And I'll jokingly say this, but this is what, especially in 90s and 80s movies, this is what people considered to be the general tone level of New York City antagonism, right? What time is it? Time for you to get a watch, moron. Like that's antagonism, right? So your antagonistic person is confrontational. They're a bit rough around the edges. A lot of people think these are the quote-unquote toxic or problem patient. They're really not. Antagonistic people are actually very easy to handle if you know what you're doing. The problem patient's more that covertly hostile type because that's the one who's going to turn around and sue you or do something weird like that unexpectedly. But that's your antagonistic person. All right, but again, would I want an antagonistic receptionist? No. Why? A patient calls. They're talking to a prospective new patient. They're on the phone and they're like, "What insurance do you have?" Let me see. I have to find my card. Okay, do you have it with you? No, I think it's okay. It's just not going to work, right? All right. Let's move up the scale. Now we move up from antagonism to boredom, 2.5. So let's frame boredom for a second, and I'm going to have you write in 2 tone levels, again, if you're not driving, so you can kind of think with where boredom resides. So at 2.4, this isn't on your scale, you have to write it in there. At 2.4, we have the tone level of monotony, 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 when something's monotonous. We've met people in monotony. Hello, how are you? My name is Jeff. It's very nice to meet you. How are you doing? I'm very interested in what you have. Monotony. Then we have boredom. And right above boredom, we have the tone level of disinterested. Okay? So, boredom is right in the middle. Mr. Hubbard describes boredom as this. He says this. It's not a state of inaction. It's a state of idle action. It's not a state of inaction. It's a state of idle action. So, let's say you have a car, not an electric car, but a gas-powered car. The car could be off. That would be inaction. Or the car can be not moving. It's in park, or if you drive a stick, it's in neutral and the emergency brake's on. And it's idling, okay? So the car's on. It's just not moving. So as Mr. Hubbard says, boredom is a state of idle action. The person's in idle. They're kind of there looking around, Not really excited about anything, nothing is really, nothing to get urgent about, nothing to get argumentative about, they're just kind of just doing their thing. And, again, like I said, I could talk about this tone level for a while, but just to give you a basic clue into it, one of the things that you'll see with boredom, this has at least been my experience, is when you're talking to them, you'll see very little change, and they may shock you. So you have a patient, and you're explaining their treatment plan, whatever that might be. And normally, you'll see when you explain a treatment plan, the person will change as they start to gain more understanding. You'll see the light bulb sort of go off, and they'll ask questions. That's what you normally expect to see. Well, with your bored person, you're talking to them, and nothing is changing. They just sort of look, and they're looking out the window, and you're wondering, what in the heck is wrong with this person? They look like they don't want to give me the time of day. So then at the end of it, you say, well, this is what you need to do, and you just let me know when you're ready, or do it or don't do it, up to you. And where they shock you is they go, okay, let's do it. Because you think there's no way this person's going to do anything. They don't want to even listen to me. It's one of the hallmarks of boredom. There's a lot more to it, but that's some of the basics. All right, then we get up from there to, you have contented. I'm not going to get into that too much. It's pretty self-explanatory. Let's move up to conservatism. So, a couple things about conservatism. First, let's explain what it is. Here's what Mr. Hubbard says. He says at 3.0 on the scale, 3.0 being conservatism, at 3.0 on the scale, a person has a conservative, cautious aspect toward life, but is reaching their goals. So a lot of people think, oh, that's a great tone level. I'm going to be conservative, right? When you go to any type of a professional convention, you go to dental conventions. I've gone to dental conventions. I go to conventions for consultants and trainers as well. It's sort of like the tone level everybody's pretending to be in. Conservatism, right? We're all in conservatism. Hello, how are you? How's it going? Fine, thank you for asking. Their wife could have left him yesterday, but, I'm doing great. It's the sort of, the way to be. I would rather be higher toned, okay? But it's definitely, conservatism's not bad. Not bad. 3.0 is pretty good. It's pretty good. But I would prefer to be higher on the tone scale. Anyway, but let's talk about this tone for a sec. So when you have a conservative applicant, you're going to see it. They're not going to be dressed with like loud clothing. They don't want to really stand out in a crowd. They want to kind of come across as very put together. It's well thought out. If you're selling to a conservative person, you're going to want to make sure you dot all the I's and cross all the T's and answer their questions. I don't know if you've ever had a patient ask you for literature on a procedure. Or a study, or, is there any literature on this Invisalign? A lot of times when someone asks for that, it's so that they'll get you to stop talking to them and they can leave. With a conservative person, they actually want to read the literature, and to make a decision, they'll actually read it and come back with questions. I have a list of questions after reading this literature. This person's great, by the way, for like an accounting type position, or a position which requires a lot of attention to detail. I had an accountant who was so firmly fixed at conservatism on the tone scale. He was the poster child for conservatism. And I'm not talking about political stuff here, guys. I'm talking about the tone, okay? We're apolitical, conservatism, non-conservative. I don't want to get into that. I'm just talking about the tone. But so he would visit me once a month. He was always 5 minutes early. He wore the same exact version of the same exact outfit every time I saw him. Blue sport coat, gold buttons, white shirt, striped tie, gray pants, black shoes. Always to a high shine every time I saw him. Took the same vacation every year after tax season to the same hotel in the same resort, trying to stay in the same area of the hotel in Aruba every year after tax season was over. Like, this guy was as predictable gets. He was conservative. One thing you'll find, too, is your conservative person hates to be pointed out in a crowd. They don't want to really rock the boat. If you were to, let's say you don't place implants now, and you go take a course and learn how to place implants, and you come back, and one of your conservative patients needs an implant. You go to them and you say, hey, Joe, just went to this course. We've had that missing tooth. I was about to refer you out, but I actually just took a course, and I learned how to place implants, and I would love for you to be my first patient. The conservative patient's going to go, doctor, I really appreciate it. I'm so honored you asked me, but I would feel more comfortable if you did a few first and you sort of worked out the kinks, and then I'm more than happy to have you do it on me. Like, that would just be too much for that conservative patient. Anyway, all right. Moving up the scale, cheerfulness, again, pretty self-explanatory. We go to 4.0, enthusiasm. So what does Mr. Hubbard say about enthusiasm? He says, at 4.0, the individual is enthusiastic, happy, and vital. The individual experiences love, strong, and outgoing. He experiences friendliness. And he goes on a bit further. He says, this is an extroversion of affinity. So like what's affinity is love or liking. What's an extroversion? It's like you're putting it out there, right? It's you're pushing it out. This person kind of confers affinity on other people. One commonly finds this in children, Mr. Hubbard says. So, person who's enthusiastic moves fast, takes quick action. You've had enthusiastic patients before. And, I don't know if you've ever had a patient who comes in, you tell them this is what you need. They go, sounds good. I'll bring you the money tomorrow. I can give you $500 today. And you think they're not going to come back tomorrow. They come back tomorrow, shock you by showing up. They refer you a ton of patients. They're the model patient. You think, where did this person come from? I need a lot of these. That was the enthusiastic patient, okay? They handle and attack problems with, rapidity. They have high self-mastery. And keep in mind also someone who's enthusiastic is not smiling all the time. It's also a very volatile tone level. If someone's enthusiastic and, something sad happens, they're going to get very sad. But they're not going to be sad forever. They're going to bounce out of it quickly. Or if something upsets them, they'll get, mad. But then they'll bounce out of that very quickly. They go up and down the tone scale with ease, very easily, very rational, very good person to work with and be around, okay? And like I said, or like Mr. Hubbard said, actually, he says one commonly finds this in children. Kids are usually at 4.0. Then they live their life and get beat up and they realize life is terrible like we all have, right? I'm kidding. And then they drop down the tone scale a bit. Anyway, so how does this, as I said, all relate to staff? Well, we want to hire up-tone people. Don't we want that receptionist who's cheerful? That's what we're doing. So we're trying to spot what this person's tone actually is. Because also part of employment, or part of the tone scale is we can predict how trustworthy they are, their ethics, their responsibility level, truthfulness, ability to handle tasks, things like this, or execute a responsibility. We also want people who are effective and move quickly. And this is what Mr. Hubbard says about that. A person who is way up the tone scale can handle stuff that is going practically at the speed of light. And a person down at the bottom of the tone scale couldn't handle a tortoise, you see? So we're looking for higher toned employees. Again, tone can change up and down through the day, but we're looking for, where does this person reside for the most part? Ideally, they're a chronic tone. So how do we spot a tone? Well, again, there's obvious things. You'll see when someone's angry, fearful, antagonistic, they might be wearing it on their sleeves through how they act, speak, etc. And as I mentioned, there's a ton of training on this. We have those links to those courses. I have the MGE Communication Sales Seminar link. I also have the DDS Success links where we do those courses on the tone scale online. So definitely check those out. But I want to give you something you can do with your applicants right after listening to this episode to at least sort of place them, not necessarily at a particular tone level, it's but this is part of the package to determine is this person higher toned or lower toned. What is this tool that I want to teach you? It's determining how to determine someone's communication lag. Communication lag. What's a communication lag? I'm going to give you the definition from Mr. Hubbard, then we're going to get into how to do this. He says, communication lag is the length of time intervening between the asking of a question by the person and the reply to that specific question by the person. Read that again. Communication lag, because what's lag, right? Lag, if I have a turbo lag in my car, it means I hit the gas and until I get to a certain point, the turbos don't kick on. There's an intervening time between when I ask for something to happen and when it actually does. That's the lag, right? So read this again. Communication lag is the length of time intervening between the asking of the question by the person and the reply to that specific question by the person. You ever ask somebody a question? Where are you from? What highway? What route did you take to get here today? What kind of car do you have? You ask a question and you get no answer. Doesn't mean they don't do anything. They say stuff, but they don't actually answer your question. Where are you from? It's funny you asked me that. I get asked that all the time. Maybe it's because my hair is brown and my eyes are green. I don't know. And have you seen that thing over there? I was wondering what was going on with that thing over there. Have they answered your question? No, they haven't. That's all part of the communication lag. And this has an impact in determining someone's tone. So let me give you a little bit more data on this and you'll see how this works. Now, Mr. Hubbard goes on. He says, it does not matter what intervenes in the time between the asking of the question and the receipt of the answer. I'll read it again. It does not matter what intervenes in the time between the asking of the question and the receipt of the answer. The person may outflow, jabber, discuss, pause, hedge, disperse, dither, or be silent. So let me define those things for you. What I'll do is I'm going to read you Mr. Hubbard's quote here again, and I'll define these as we go. So again, he says, it does not matter what intervenes in the time between the asking of the question and the receipt of the answer. The person may outflow. What would outflow mean? Talk. Jabber, which is to, babble or speak very fast. Discuss. We all know what that means. Pause, not say anything. Hedge. Hedge means to be uncertain or hesitate, maybe be polite about something. I don't know, maybe let me think about that. Disperse, which would mean to avoid the question, change the subject, etc. Dither, which is to hesitate or be undecided. Oh, I don't know, right? Or be silent. So you asked a question, where are you from, and the person doesn't answer, and instead they do any of these things that he just described. That's the comm lag. He explains further. No matter what he does or how he does it between the asking of the question and the giving of the answer, the time is the communication lag. The near answer, a guessing answer, an undecided answer are alike imprecise answers and are not adequate responses to the question. Now, how do we use this? Mr. Hubbard explains. Now, here comes a specialized knowledge on communication lag. A person may have a very short lag on social questions. He explains what this is in a second. They may be able to answer immediately and expertly what their name is, how old they are, and many other things. These questions are actually being answered by social machinery or habitual practice. They actually have no lag, apparently. But remember, the interviewer in this case is not asking the person. They're asking a social response machine for the socially acceptable answer. So if I see you somewhere and I go, hey, how you doing? What are you going to say? Great. Did you think about that? Did you have to? No, that's what we say. How's it going? Good. What are you up to? Not much. These are just answers boom, boom. They're being answered by social machinery, circuit 27Y, okay? Whatever. It's like pressing a button. How you doing? Beep. Great. It just comes out without thought. So you can't check communication lag by asking social type questions, okay? Because you won't know how long of a lag the person actually has. He explains. Thus, in establishing communication lag, it is necessary, this is Mr. Hubbard again, thus, in establishing communication lag, it is necessary for the interviewer to ask non-social questions. The question, what is your name, may be replied to very readily. However, this is a social question, and thus one would have to ask the question such as, how many doors in this room, in order to post a question which requires intelligent differentiation on the part of the person. He throws that out as a quick example. How many doors are in this room? Oh, let me see, there's 3, right? I'm not saying you ask this during a personnel interview, but I think you're getting the idea. He says you have to ask a question which requires, as he says, intelligent differentiation. They have to actually look and go, oh, yeah. They actually have to access their brain or mind. Now, he says the length of time it takes for him to resolve this question as a problem and reply to it is the lag time. I'm going to give you some examples of this in a second. But here's where he ends it. Actually, it is the lag which situates the person on the tone scale for the interviewer. So, if I'm talking to somebody, and they could be talking, keep in mind, right? They're talking, they're doing stuff, they're saying things, but they're not answering my actual questions. They have a massive communication lag. That would place them lower on the tone scale. Whereas somebody with a very rapid communication lag, or no lag, or little to no lag, is higher on the tone scale. So how would we apply this in an interview? Well, as Mr. Hubbard says again, post a question which requires intelligent differentiation on the part of the person. So what kind of questions could you ask? Well, some of these are going to come in next week's episode when I get into how to check productivity record. But there's some simple stuff you could ask when you sit down with the person at first. Hey, where'd you park? Or if you're interviewing a technical staff member, what type of cement did your doctor use when he or she did inlays? right? Or it's a financial coordinator. Which insurance company tended to give you the most trouble? Or you're asking somebody, at what point did you select dentistry as a profession? What was it that made you decide to do that, right? Or how long did you schedule this type of procedure for? Or explain your new patient scheduling policy in the last practice you worked in. Think of any type of a question where the person has to actually think. That's the most important thing. So it could be something as stupid as, what route did you take to get here today? And if the response is, it's funny you asked me that. I just got asked that at the gas station. And I didn't know the name of the road, but, it's funny you asked because, the way that my brother goes to work, like, they're not answering your question. And they may not talk, as Mr. Hubbard says. They may do other things. They may dither. They may hedge. They may just stare at you sort of dumbfounded. It doesn't matter. All of these are communication lag. If I get a long lag, that's an extremely big red flag. Short lag, not a red flag, but I have to be careful about the questions I'm asking. I make sure that my questions require intelligent differentiation. And you can think of any of these where a person would actually have to, tap their mind and to give you a reply, not something that they're just going to reply to automatically. Okay? So, as I said, there is a ton more to this tone scale. This tone scale has a lot of use in sales. To give you a couple scenarios, let's say you have a patient who's antagonistic or angry. You're not going to sell them by asking them, wouldn't it be great to have a beautiful smile? Or wouldn't you love to keep your teeth for a lifetime? That's not going to fly. There's different ways of approaching different patients at various tones. With hiring, you want to make sure that you're kind of pushing for the top of the tone scale when you're bringing in personnel. And it has use in a lot of other areas. You could use it in dating for a life if that's what you're doing, right? So it has use, like complete utility in interpersonal relations. So, like I said, a lot to know. We have a link for you on the episode webpage if you want to check it out. So for the next 2 episodes, we're going to go over these other, like we've just covered tone level here on the hiring process, other than sort of the basic requirements of hiring. In the next couple episodes, I'm going to get into how to determine whether the person was productive at prior jobs and how to verify that production, as well as a number of other points we're looking for when we're hiring somebody. And then we'll get into how you would model your interview process to make it effective and efficient. Anyway, if you're still with me, folks, it's a longer episode. Looking at the counter here, I'm a little over an hour and change. I appreciate you sticking with me. I hope this helped. I have all the links and downloads I mentioned, including that download for the tone scale on the episode webpage. If you want to know more about MGE, you can find us online at mgeonline.com or call us at 800-640-1140. Folks, have a great week, and we will see you at the next episode.